Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've made it. A full day of action between the Xfinity Series and the Cup Series. We're going to post the link here and make sure we get everybody on board here. All right, so we'll give this a few minutes here to get everybody filing in here. All right, can you guys hear me okay? We're still trying a different setup here to make sure everything sounds good. But we're starting right off the bat talking about the action from today's races in Las Vegas. Thank you for tuning in. For those of you new to this here, this is going to be the new channel where we're going to be doing live streams, which will include the live streams formerly the disqualification show. I decided to try to expand on that a bit more with the commentary and so forth there, and jump in on that with both feet. And so this is going to be the new home for the disqualification show. We're going to take things a little differently. Show's not going to necessarily always go right up to the point where disqualification results come in. And I think this actually turned out, although it wasn't planned this way, perfect opportunity to start this new format since we had two races run the same day. And I'm sure that's completely wreaked havoc with whatever the protocol is for technical inspection results for both those races. So definitely going to be an interesting angle from that. So we'll do something a little different here. Again, feel free to post any comments in the chat as usual. We'll treat this exactly the same as the deal with the disqualification show beyond the actual length of the show. And again, more of a focus on the actual action from the races, which we already did before, going through the lineups and talking about the big stories from both ends of the field. Going to be a very big week this week. As you know, the Cup Series and the Xfinity Series are going to be traveling to the Auto Club Speedway in Fontana, and I will be there covering the action for you guys there. So make sure you stay tuned to everything on my Twitter feed at LastCar on Brock, as well as the website lastcar.info, and have some more stuff for you guys to look forward to. As you can see with this little display here, my microphone stand broke down, so we are going very old school here and putting the microphone in a cup here in the meantime. And it seemed like it worked okay in the first show. I'm not exactly sure how it's working, but I know the one I did on the Kyle Busch video, I didn't have the microphone out and all, and I wasn't happy with the audio. So we're going to go ahead and jump back to this again. Just finishing up now from the Xfinity Series race, Chase Briscoe, your race winner today, holding off Austin Cindric. A fantastic run for Ryan Sieg in the third position there. Great run for him in the number 39 car. Looked like for a while there in the closing stages he was going to have an outside shot at actually going for the victory, that elusive first victory for both himself and the RSS racing team. Again, as we did in the previous show, talked about how much of a great run it is for Ryan and for that team and for all they've been able to accomplish there at that program. It's been great to see them be consistent. And now a third place run is almost not even that surprising for them these days, again, being a top five contender. Also, kudos to the crew there in the booth for bringing up Brandon Brown again during the race and having a good run for him, just on the outside of the top 10 in the 11th position. Very close to getting another top 10 for the 68 car after a good run at Daytona just last week. So good deals again. Those two teams continue to be a real fascinating story there in the Xfinity Series, and we certainly hope that things continue to pick up for those guys in the weeks ahead. Looking further back, Josh Williams and Jesse Little were getting a little love there in the broadcast too. That was good to see. Brett Moffitt there in the 15th spot there. For Our Motorsports, looked like they had a little bit of a mechanical issue there towards the end of the race that brought them to the back of the field. Unfortunately, couldn't get up there with the other guys at the same time. But that's how it all shakes out there. The LastCar articles, although the LastCar is not going to be really the major emphasis here for these live streams, those articles are going to be ready later tonight. Got to wait until, of course, you get the technical inspection results for the Xfinity race. Unofficially, Landon Castle, your last place finisher in the first race that he's run since his event at Homestead last year when he had the great 15th place finish. The couple of fans there continuing to sponsor Shepard's team there, covering their tire bill and getting back out there. Unfortunately, it wasn't that same situation here. It was actually a rather smart decision under the circumstances, I would say, by the Shepherd's team, pulling their car off in the early laps, knowing that there was rain in the area, pulling off after 31 laps, and then at lap 50, getting the race pushed from Saturday to Sunday. I'm sure knowing from their experience over at Darlington last year, when they exited the race at a very early stage before the race was even over with, they were already loaded up and ready to go to the next race. And here on the West Coast swing, I'm sure that's one thing that they're already looking to. So they'll be heading to Los Angeles, much like we will be here this weekend. And, we'll see what happens with the number 89 team. Certainly hope that they can work out another deal where they're able to have somebody cover their tire bill and show what they can do, especially at these speedways. You get a good run at Homestead, at any kind of a mile-and-a-half track for that matter. You can get a good run, at a majority of the calendar. And hopefully things turn out like that for Shepherd and the team. I know they're working on a lot of things at the moment. And good to see Landon Castle back out there, of course, having not been able to run in the Cup Series anymore for Starcom Racing now that Quinn Houff is taking over for him with a 00. Looking further back, also got to give big kudos to JJ Yaley. Although qualifying was rained out for both the Xfinity Series and the Cup Series, it was good to see JJ Yaley start up front, whatever the circumstances. Kind of reminds me of the 2009 Open race at Charlotte, where you had a random draw and you ended up having Kirk Shelmerdine and Carl Long on the front row. But still, seeing JJ Yaley up there, a quality journeyman driver there, getting things going. Qualifying, or at least lined up originally in the 5th spot. And then when Myatt Snyder dropped to the back of the field, actually lined up 3rd for the start. Fell back a little bit there, of course, and running a bit further back within the constraints of the limited budget that the Jimmy Means Racing team had. But also good to see them get some camera time on that, and that was a good story to see. So hopefully things will help out for them looking forward. I know at Fontana last year, Cesar Baccarella was your last place finisher in that race. You had a situation where Jimmy Means' team was actually providing a backup car for the DGM Racing team, Mario Gosselin's team, when they were going through cars during the West Coast swing and were running out of backup machines. They were one of the teams that was helping them out. And ended up pulling out of the race early with David Starr in the primary number 52. Starr, of course, now driving for JD Motorsports. But again, yeah, great runs for again our two continuing underdog heroes between Brandon Brown and Ryan Sieg, and we'll be interested to see what they're going to do, and perhaps those same cars, or very likely under the circumstances, next week at Fontana for next Saturday's race to start off the action there. Let's see. Daniel Hemrick, unfortunate deal for Daniel. Again, talk about drivers like Landon Castle, shaken out of Cup Series rides. Obviously, the storyline with Hemrick having the Rookie of the Year honors last year, the number 8 car, had a real good breakout weekend in the Roval the year before that when he was just preparing to run the number 8 car. But unfortunately, ultimately losing that ride to Tyler Reddick after Reddick won his 2nd consecutive Xfinity Series championship last year. Reddick having a good run actually today in the Las Vegas Cup Series race earlier today, and that'll be another thing to definitely talk about going forward. Unfortunately, Hemrick involved in an early accident. That looks like the team was able to keep going at least for enough laps to finish ahead of Castle at the final running order, but ultimately a short day for the number 8 car, finishing next to last in the lineup. And it appeared only 34 cars actually started the second day of the race. Again, correction from the earlier tweet there. Absolutely, the switch between all the drivers at Carl Long Motorsports, or Motorsports Business Management, rather. Stephen Light, the number 66, pulling down on the apron in the early laps and falling out the 34th position, and the rest of the field from there. But two very different races being held today between the Saturday race, between the original scheduled deal there, and then the situation there during the Cup Series race as well. We'll certainly get into that and talk about that a bit more there. You had a pretty calm finish there under the lights for the Xfinity Series team, but no late race craziness, whereas the Cup Series race, everybody running on the absolute edge out there. An interesting test for the aero package and everything there. So Interesting to see. Just checking out the comments there again. Thank you guys for joining in here. I know it's a bit of an adjustment here with a new channel, but I'm sure we're going to keep things pretty flexible here and doing a lot more commentary videos here. I felt that doing a new channel would be a good approach, but I don't want to lose doing the post-race shows here since I know we have a good group here going, and we're just going to take a lateral move right into this and talk about the other series there. Check out your comment there, Stephen C, about the RSS team's equipment. My understanding is that there was Richard Childress racing equipment there. I know, if I remember correctly, Austin Dillon was talking about that even during this broadcast a bit, about having some equipment shared from other bigger teams out there. But a different set of circumstances for these teams developing. Obviously, any amount of quality equipment that these small Xfinity Series teams can put together, it's obviously going to make a big difference. And if you already have a lot of Cup Series teams not competing in the Xfinity Series, any little bit of a margin can actually put you on the verge of getting a top 10, a top 5, or even an outside chance at victory. And this was even in a race that was relatively calm as the finish of this race was this evening in the Xfinity Series. That was definitely that set of circumstances there. Yeah, a little bit of controversy there with Noah Gragson and Myatt Snyder there. Snyder, I'm sure, did not want to have a repeat of what happened to him in practice when the front splitter got ripped off of his 21 car. Managed to spin into the grass a lot slower and not cause any serious damage. But yeah, a little surprised nothing much more has happened after that. But we'll see if that'll be definitely something to watch at Fontana next week. Even though it's only the third race of the season, I already feel like there's plenty of storylines that are going to be interesting. An unfortunate deal there in the race there again on the other flip side of the coin there for Tommy Joe Martins. It looked like they had to spend a lengthy period of time in the garage area and ultimately had a fire behind the left front wheel of the car, pulled off the track at that point. Obviously still working out the kinks there in the number 44 team, but hopefully, again, they're still getting their feet under them, and hopefully Fontana will be perhaps an opportunity for them to turn things around. Not to say opportunity anywhere nearly as much as Adam Alexander did in today's broadcast, but that was the thing. Well, without further ado, let's jump into the Cup Series race, because I'm sure that is definitely the bigger story here, certainly in terms of competition and certainly in terms of great quality runs by a number of teams that either don't get talked about that much or don't finish that well up there. And also some moments that really verified a lot of the successful runs that we saw at Daytona, or at least in the short term here. First among those, of course, and you guys are already mentioning it here, Matt DiBenedetto, having a runner-up finish in just his second ever start for the Wood brothers. Of course, Penske Racing teams there always seem to really excel at Las Vegas. Last year, we saw that two-car battle between Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano, and now Logano winning the race this time around with Keselowski's crew to start things off for him. But Matt DiBenedetto right up there in the second place finish there, driving through all the mess that they had at the finish there. Also a fantastic run for Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Obviously, Stenhouse known much more for his super speedway prowess and his pole last week at Daytona. This time around, finishing in the third position there in his second ever start for the JTG Daugherty team. A fantastic run for him. Fantastic run, really, for the team as well. I know Ryan Preece didn't get quite as much attention as he did last week when he was challenging for a top 10 before he was eliminated in the Ross Chastain accident. But as mentioned in the Fox broadcast, he was about to inherit the second spot with that weird pit strategy towards the end there before the engine let go, and he ended up finishing next to last in the running order. But JTG really making a statement this year. Obviously, the crew members that Stenhouse has brought with him to help out the number 47 are certainly paying their dividends already. Hopefully, Fontana will be another opportunity for them to build on that even more and get a good run. Also, good verification for the new Chevrolet nose. Much like the 2000 season and the adjustments that were needed to keep the new Monte Carlo competitive with the Ford Taurus and the other models that were running at the same time. The new Chevy Monte Carlo, showing my age there. The new Chevrolet Camaro ZL1 deal is really taken off pretty well so far. I think in this one, seeing Jimmy Johnson getting a good run again, seeing Bubba Wallace back up there again, following up his recovery from the accident last week at Daytona, to see Bubba finishing in the sixth spot, a great run for him. Chevy seemed to be just as competitive with the Fords and the Toyotas as they'd ever been, and certainly a lot more than perhaps we'd seen in these first couple of years with the Camaros out there. A little bit of a change there to the nose, much like, again, the extension on the nose of the old Monte Carlos back in the day. Great runs for a lot of Chevrolet teams. Going to be very excited to see what happens with them at Fontana going forward and how much further they can keep that momentum going. Obviously, when you think of Fontana, you think of the High Line, you think of Kyle Larson, you think of Kurt Busch, you think about some of these other competitors that have historically done well there and mixed things up with the Roush Fenway drivers, the other Ford drivers, and hopefully mixing things up with the Toyota drivers, where we see Martin Truex Jr. and Kyle Busch be really strong at Fontana in recent years. Great run for Austin Dillon, who went from fourth in the finishing order there, building on his good run in the Clash a couple weeks ago at Daytona, and then, of course, jumping into the broadcast booth after the race was over with to continue covering the action there for the Xfinity Series race there. Good run for him. We mentioned Jimmy Johnson briefly there. It's interesting. Somebody else already pointed this out on Twitter. When you talk about upset runs or surprising runs and mentioning Jimmy Johnson in that same sentence, it seems bizarre to even think of such a thing even 5 years ago. But here we are in Jimmy Johnson's final season, and he has his first top five of the year in the second race of the year, and a good run for him there in spite of some contact with the outside wall. Of course, no shortage of contact in the race, and that brings us to the aero package itself. Very excited by the amount of close racing that we saw. A lot of people bumping and nudging, very much like the Truck Series race at Daytona last week, where you had a lot of accidents you had some accidents that did happen, but you also had quite a few more accidents that very much didn't happen, and really spoke to the quality of the drivers out there and being able to compete with this aero package and put on a good show out there. It was interesting at certain points. There were some media members that were tweeting during the race and didn't seem too impressed with the level of competition out there. And it is still unfortunate that we're in this situation where these cars are deliberately running slower than they ordinarily would. And that trend seems to be continuing already with the next gen car for next season. But much like, again, not an unprecedented move. 1993, the restrictor plate package that they created to make things more competitive involved making the cars run much slower. And of course, now we're looking at something that expands much more into the mile-and-a-half tracks, which are much more problematic speedways in terms of competition in recent years. We saw so much in this race. We saw lead changes. We saw people come from the back to the front. We saw people rallying through the field. Really unfortunate for Ross Chastain's spin at the end, not only for the fact that he had a good top 20 run going, driving the Rocket Man's car there. And again, our best wishes to Ryan Newman as he continues his recovery. But it was going to be very interesting to see if Alex Bowman was going to be able to track down Ryan Blaney at the end of the race. I thought he could have caught him and very well likely could have driven right through him, much like Ryan Blaney was able to do with Joey Logano in the previous run there. Very encouraged to see drivers being able to, experience tire drop off and work their way up and even actually make the track look a lot rougher than one would originally think. Las Vegas, of course, being, the cookie cutter that it is, one would not think of it typically being as one of the most rough tracks out there compared to your Darlingtons and so forth. But even from the onboard cameras, as well as some of the other shots during the race there, it really looked like everybody was just hanging on, and that definitely helped the racing product. I'm certainly glad the weather turned around. I'm not sure if we would have seen the same thing if we had similar cloudy or evening conditions that the Xfinity Series was racing under. But generally pretty pleased with that. You had a bit of drama as well here with Chase Elliott competing for the win, and much like Phoenix last year, felled by a flat rear tire that ultimately put him into the outside wall and ruined his chances of actually winning. Martin Truex Jr., the second best car easily in the race to Chase for much of that race. Then having just a slight scuff to the outside wall and really revealing the fragility of the Gen 6 car. With just the slightest bit of contact, the fenders are flared out to such a degree to tolerances that are so small that with the slightest bit of contact, you get a bit of a rub and stuffs you into the wall. much like Kevin Harvick at Fontana a couple years ago. Very impressed by the work that Joe Gibbs Racing was able to do to get the number 19 back out there. Good recovery by them to not only make sure that he got back out there within the constraints of the crash clock, but also to make sure that he stayed on the lead lap, which is something that even Christopher Bell wasn't able to accomplish. But what Christopher Bell was able to accomplish was one of the most dramatic saves that I got to say. As I tweeted there during the race, I think he is absolutely ready for the Cup Series. The multiple-time Chili Bowl winner and dominant driver in the Xfinity Series from last year, definitely showing his ability out there, in spite of the fact that he, of course, had an accident that happened later on there that ultimately took him out of contention. But regardless, doesn't take away from a very promising start for him, and a lot of excitement, I think, around this particular group of rookies. I didn't see as much out of the number 41 there with Cole Custer, but it seemed like both Reddick and Christopher Bell were really putting on a clinic out there. Bell with his dramatic save and being able to recover from that. Reddick actually repeating very much the same run that we saw with him the last time he ran the Tame the Beast paint scheme in a Cup Series race last year at Kansas when he had a top 10 run going there. Very impressed with him being able to follow that up. The finish didn't necessarily show with him back in the 18th position. He looked like he was set for a top 10 easily prior to all the crazy stuff that happened there. Somebody again slipping into the top 10, a good run for Ty Dillon, who last year won his first couple of stage races there last year, not the overall races, but claiming a couple stage wins along the season at Bristol and Talladega. This year coming back and getting a 10th place finish there. Again, another win for the new Chevrolet nose and other competitors out there. The weather is looking pretty good next week at Fontana as well, so we should have about similar conditions to at least what we saw the first part of today and Sunday, and hopefully not as much of what we saw during the unusual rainstorms that hampered much of Saturday's track activities for the different series out there. You got a feel for Ryan Blaney. Obviously, he expressed a lot of frustration about lap traffic out there, very similar to Kyle Busch's concerns we've seen in the past. Blaney slipping back to the 11th spot at the end of the day. But you had a situation where he had to pit with a lot of the other leaders. Pit strategy not quite working out as well for him. But again, a good strong run there, and following up with his runner-up finish in the Daytona 500 last week, he's certainly off to a good start, and hopefully can continue to have a good performance in the West Coast swing. Kevin Harvick with a good 8th place finish there. Brad Keselowski, didn't see as much of him as I expected to. He was really my fantasy pick there for the win, and so I was following him quite a bit in this race. He didn't seem to really be a factor in the stages there. He did end up finishing in the 7th spot, but that was about where his car ran for most of that day, if not just on the outside of the top 10. Also, a lot was made about Denny Hamlin having a lot of struggles in this being a track that he is not won on, having a lot of difficulties there in the number 11 car. But then, of course, on top of that, the rather bizarre story of the front valence changes to the Joe Gibbs Racing cars leading up to the race, and having once again for the second straight week a NASCAR team really hampered by a legal body modification situation. Of course, we saw this last week with Timmy Hill's team in the Xfinity Series, which seemed to be an honest mistake from the account that the team provided about some Bondo being put into the cracks around the headlights, unbeknownst to them from the paint shop that they brought the car to. This time around, now apparently there was a bizarre little piece below the front crest on the nose of the cars, but it wasn't on all the Joe Gibbs cars nor all the Toyotas that were non-Gibbs cars, but just a few of them there, perhaps pushing the limits of the rule book a little bit. Some of them getting caught, Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch, as well as the aforementioned Christopher Bell, had to get sent to the back of the field there. However, Eric Jones and Martin Truex, as well as the non-Gibbs Toyota of course, Christopher Bell not being Gibbs, but Gibbs affiliated, but the other non-Gibbs Toyota of Daniel Suarez not being docked for that penalty. Suarez, of course, having an unfortunate start to the year himself. He was able to start the race simply because there were fewer than 40 cars that were entered. But at the start of the race, it looked like Christopher Bell was smoking on the backstretch. That turned out to be Suarez himself, an electrical issue dropping him to the back of the field early. He ultimately, the last place spot changed hands several times after that before the ultimately hearing back about the technical inspection results. And we'll have some more information on that when the articles are completed later tonight and when the technical inspection is complete for both the Cup Series and the Xfinity Series today. But and really with Timmy Hill as the last place finisher in the race, that was a good opportunity, I felt, to really talk a lot more about just his great run back at Daytona between the Xfinity Series and the Cup Series, and the performance improvements generally of Carl Long's team as they are now steering back away from the Xfinity Series a little bit and into the Cup Series. But the article will cover that a bit more. Looking at some other runs here, John Hunter Nemechek seemed like he had a rough run after a pretty solid performance at Daytona last week. He ended up spinning a couple of times there at towards the end of the race there, finished in the 24th position. But again, decent start to the year for a rookie there. He's looking to stay in the conversation along with the big three from the Xfinity Series last year. And it'll be interesting to see if he can keep that momentum coming up into Fontana next week. We mentioned Ross Chastain, of course. More developments on the Ryan Newman story that, again, has continued to go on this week. Not a lot of real specific details about Newman's medical condition beyond apparently a head injury. Not clear on if it was specifically what the nature of that head injury is, if that means a concussion, if that means a surface injury like stitches or anything. It's really hard to tell. Don't want to really speculate on that, but whatever it is, it's certainly something the doctors are concerned enough about. They kept him out of the car this week in Las Vegas, and the timetable is still not official as to what his return is going to be, but certainly a lot of good honorary deals there during this weekend for Newman, keeping him in everybody's thoughts, both David Starr's car as well as the car that Ross Chastain was driving in Newman's place. Both having decals in honor of Newman, as well as mentioned during the invocation as well. Good measures there. But yes, I mean, Ryan Newman being released from the hospital is, of course, still good news. I still maintain from the other video that's on this channel, I agree with a lot of the statements, especially by NASCAR Man in his article about Newman being very outspoken about safety on the super speedways. That I think any solution to what caused his accident in Daytona should involve Newman, at least in the discussion of the process. I think that that would be a good place to start. It's really hard to talk about actual solutions because there's a lot of moving parts in there, quite literally, between green, white checker finishes, the existing super speedway package, and everything else in between, just the safety of the cars in general, or the safety of the track in general. A number of things called into question. I do hope that it's something that we don't just forget about. I think it's very easy and very tempting to at this point, knowing that Ryan Newman has at least walked out of the hospital with his family, and that there is some timetable for him to return, as the other statement expressed in the statement from earlier today, that he does intend to still compete for the 2020 championship, which means that he will almost certainly pursue a medical waiver, much like Kyle Busch did in 2015 when he won the championship after his own injury during Speed Weeks that year. But obviously, that is going to be an interesting story to follow in the days and weeks ahead. But as to what is going to change, if anything, at the super speedways, or what should be changed, the debate continues. And I think as long as that debate's still going, I think we can at least come closer to a solution that can prevent, if not entirely, an accident like that from happening, at least reducing the chances of such things happening. I still maintain that I don't believe the green, white checkers or overtime finishes really are something that caused these accidents. I think that regardless of when the last lap of the race is, whether it's 10 laps to go and there's rain on the way, whether it's 2 laps to go and they're racing to the caution flag that's going to end the race, like Dale Earnhardt did in 1998, for example, or whether you're in an overtime finish and it's 7 or 8 or 9 laps past distance and everybody's running out of fuel, they're going to be running as fast as they can. And that is never going to go away. All you can do is just try not to create additional situations to make that any more dangerous than is absolutely necessary in competition, and also make the cars just the very best they can be, the very safest they can be, under the circumstances, without really preventing them from actually competing as race car drivers. That's the balance that I think needs to be struck. And there was a lot more discussion about that after today's race, of course, and the bizarre finish with the big pile up there at the end. Very different situation, I believe, from what we had at Daytona. The replays, although limited of what happened to Chase Elliott on the final lap, seemed to indicate that it was a single car spin that didn't collect any other drivers. He certainly wasn't visible in the area of the accident after Ryan Newman's wreck, so he must have been able to keep going after the accident, and didn't really have any bearing on the accident itself, which occurred well before the start-finish line. Of course, in this Las Vegas race, you had a huge pileup that just exploded past the start-finish line. You got debris all over the place, and no real safe means of negotiating the cars back around the track. I was a bit disappointed in the broadcast call of the finish of this race because it provided some unnecessary confusion. I know I got a bit of criticism on that, pointing that out, but it shouldn't have been complicated. If he crossed the start-finish line and received the white flag, then of course, yeah, the race is over. You have the next flag ends the race. It's pretty clear on that. But of course, the problem that we've always had with this rule is, and Jeff Gordon in the booth, of all people, should know this because he lost a very prolific Martinsville race because of this, that if the flag comes out or the moment of caution is deemed to be before the leader crosses the stripe, it doesn't matter if the white flag was waved. It doesn't matter if you could see the white flag, that the race is still not over and you get another green, white, checkered finish. That is the interpretation of the rule. And even though it's an inconsistency that occurred, and you can't prevent that. Pretend that has not happened. And this is again a problem that the sport has been grappling with. And while I don't believe explicitly responsible for some of these serious accidents, it is responsible for, if nothing else, the very serious spiraling debates online about word choice. Really, at the end of the day, and the word choice does matter. If you're going to say that he received the white flag or he saw the white flag, there's a big difference between those two terms. There's been plenty of times where the leaders cross the start finish line. They're like, oh, no, we're going to have another green, white, checkered finish. They just say that they say that happens. And this isn't the first time we've seen this with the booth in particular. And it's not just picking on Fox. If I remember correctly, Steve Letarte was in a very similar situation last year at NBC. I think it was for the Talladega race, where it's also trying to interpret a rule. And it sounded like they just kind of said something and just said like, oh, well, this would have happened anyway. I don't remember the exact circumstances, but it felt familiar with the call at the end of this race in particular, where a lot of unnecessary confusion was thrown in as to whether there was going to be a green, white checker or not, as if the person received the flag or not. And it really should address the issue of, look, if the issue is this complicated, if we can't even clear up when the driver received the caution flag or the white flag or whatever flag it is, maybe you should still just let them race to the finish line, and then, okay, whoever reaches the line first is the winner. I mean, why don't we just do that? I'm not saying you get rid of, bring back racing to the caution in every circumstance, but, perhaps have some kind of way of making the drivers understand that, look, in the interest of consistency and the interest of not throwing a caution flag that's just going to confuse everybody and wonder when the field was frozen, we'll just let you race to the finish. If it's within the last, 5 laps of the finish, it's almost like the old red flag rule we had before the green, white, checkered thing was even instituted. Maybe we got to go back a few steps and figure something out on that. Would it have really mattered in today's race? Not really. I mean, we had a big pile up that, like I say, wasn't going to be cleaned up anytime soon. Wasn't going to be a lot of drivers left over, and would have extended a day that was already going to be quite long with the Xfinity race running afterwards, well past its distance. But these are the debates. These are the debates that are revolving already, and we're only 2 races into the season, folks. Going to be a lot of things to talk about the days and weeks ahead. But it's an interesting different deal on that. Oh, Jimmy Johnson said Monte Carlo as well, Stephen C. I didn't hear that. That's a good deal. Oh my gosh. Well, okay. See, everybody's got that on the brain. Of course, if we're talking about Jimmy Johnson and his retirement season, I'm sure he's thinking about the old Monte Carlo he ran years ago, the old Lowe's paint schemes and everything. So you got that. Looking at your comment there, MLG Pro Swag 69. Allegedly, there was something wrong with the way the Toyotas were built this week. Eric Jones and his crew chief had a discussion about it. Said they couldn't say more over the radio. Okay, well, there's an interesting element there. Now that's interesting. Now, isn't it that interesting, really, at the end of the day, with the debate between a big team or a small team? A big team, they can fall back on if there's a defect or something doesn't look quite right on a car. Oh, the car was just like built wrong. Like it was Toyota's fault. Something happened there. And then you got like the Bondo strips on the cars over at Carl Long's team, and suddenly that's just the banhammer. 75 owner points, $50,000, and Sebastian LaForge, the crew chief there, out of the Xfinity garage for 6 races. You know, as if Carl Long doesn't have enough experience with severe penalties already. It's interesting always when they throw the book at and how hard they throw it and who they throw it at. But hey, you know, those are the breaks, and those are things that they have to work on there. Goodness me. But yeah, pretty crazy deal there with the races today. You know, and very interested to see what kind of momentum we're going to have building from there, heading into of course Fontana the weeks after that. And on that subject, let me pull this out here for you guys. We had a special delivery come in here, and let me bring this bad boy out for you. For those of you that are in the Patreon, the magnet has arrived, and here it is right here. So this is the magnet that we're going to be carrying on the car here this week for our trip down to Fontana for the upcoming week. As you can see, we picked LA Laker colors in honor of the late Kobe Bryant, the victims of the accident back in January, and of course a call as well for the late John Andretti with the number 43 on here, and of course the hashtag Check It for Andretti on there as well. So this is going to be on our car this week. Stay tuned to our Twitter feed at LastCar on Brock for more updates on where we stop along the way. And if you want to get your name on there, it's still not too late. If you join the Patreon anytime through this weekend, we'll write your name in on here, and you'll also be entered in the same drawing that these people are to win this magnet. I'll mail it back to you in the exact same envelope here as we did with the past 2 magnets for our East Coast trip, as well as our deal to Phoenix last November. Looking ahead, I'm looking on doing these at least for the 3 races that we're looking at this year. Texas is still something that's up in the air, but Sonoma certainly in June, and our return to Phoenix that we have planned in November. So we have this all set up, so stay tuned for more information on that. They do a really nice job. I think it was buildasign.com, I believe. I know we did a couple different companies on this. Yeah, Build a Sign. So good plug for those guys. They did a good job getting that set up. And so that's going to be our deal here coming up this week. So again, I'm actually going to kind of just wrap the show up here at this point. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We're just going to be doing, again, I know it's a bit shorter of a video than what we usually do, but that's not just because of the different circumstance of the 2 races back and forth, but also looking ahead to doing more videos on this channel. And thank you again so much, you guys, for subscribing. I know it's a pain adding another channel on there and having to jump back and forth between the 2. But I'm confident, I think, that we can actually do some more live videos on here. And when other crazy stories come up, like the Kevin Harvick bounty, that's something that we'll just jump in and do a bit of a video on, probably between about 15 to 30 minutes, kind of like this one here. We're getting up to about 40 minutes on this one, and that'll be kind of more the norm. And then you can kind of get a more genuine reaction on all this. So definitely stay tuned to this channel. Make sure you subscribe and hit that little bell icon so you get notified of new videos on this channel, in addition to stuff that is produced on the main channel there on YouTube. And stay tuned this week for more content as we get ready for Fontana. Of course, the entry list storylines this Thursday, and getting ready for the action. We're going to be there all 3 days, Friday through Sunday. Last Bro is going to be out in the stands over in Turn 1. And I'll be working in the garage area. Got a lot of people that looking forward to talking to, and looking forward to getting you guys the inside scoop from the back of the pack there for the website. So again, thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm gonna let you guys go here. I know it's late there on for you guys on the East Coast. Have a great week, and stay tuned for more videos on this channel and more content at lastcar.info. Thank you very much, everyone.